Hey there, friends. Get ready, because I've got a super fun story for you today. It's all about a sunny little neighborhood, a porch swing, and one very nosy lady who stirred up some big trouble. Picture this, it's a bright, happy afternoon in a place called Oakwood Lane. Kids are running around in the yards, laughing and playing games. Birds are chirping in the trees, making little songs that float through the air. Everything feels calm and perfect, like the kind of day you'd want to spend outside with a popsicle. But wait. Not everyone in Oakwood Lane is smiling. Oh no, there's a twist coming, and it's a good one. Let me introduce you to Sarah Miller. She's a mom, and she's super nice. She just moved into a cute house on Oakwood Lane with her 8-year-old son, Tommy. Sarah's got short brown hair, a big smile, and a heart full of excitement. Why? Because after years of saving her money penny by penny, she finally bought her very own home. It's got a little porch out front, and on that porch is something special, a cozy wooden swing. That swing isn't just any swing. It's the kind Sarah dreamed about when she was a little girl. She'd imagined sitting on it, rocking back and forth, feeling the breeze on her face. Now, it's real, and she can't wait to enjoy it with Tommy. Tommy loves the swing too. He's a small kid with messy black hair and a giggle that makes everyone laugh. The first day they moved in, he ran straight to the porch and jumped on that swing. "Push me, Mom," he shouted, his sneakers kicking the air. Sarah laughed and gave him a big push, watching him swing higher and higher. To them, it was the best part of their new house. It felt like a fresh start, a happy little spot where they could relax and make memories. But here's the thing, not everyone thought that swing was so great. Nope, not at all. Across the street lived a lady named Karen Baxter. Now, Karen wasn't like Sarah. She didn't smile much, and she didn't wave hello. Instead, she watched. She watched everything. Karen was the boss of something called the HOA. That's a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood. They decide things like what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. Karen loved those rules more than anything. She carried a little notebook in her purse and wrote down every tiny thing she didn't like. A mailbox that was too rusty? She'd write it down. A bike left in a driveway? She'd write that down too. Karen thought she was the queen of Oakwood Lane, and she wanted everyone to follow her orders. The first time Karen saw Sarah's porch swing, her eyes got narrow. She stood on her own porch, arms crossed, staring across the street. That swing, it bothered her. She didn't know why yet, but she could feel it deep in her bones. Something about it wasn't right. Maybe it was the way it swayed in the wind, creaking a little. Maybe it was the bright red cushion Sarah put on it. Or maybe Karen just didn't like seeing Sarah and Tommy so happy. Whatever it was, Karen made up her mind right then and there, that swing was a problem. A big problem. Sarah didn't notice Karen watching. She was too busy. Moving into a new house is a lot of work, you know. There were boxes to unpack, boxes full of Tommy's toys, Sarah's clothes, and pots and pans for the kitchen. She had to figure out where the couch would go and hang up pictures on the walls. Every night, she'd fall into bed, tired but happy. "This is our home now," she'd whisper to herself, smiling in the dark. She didn't have time to think about the lady across the street. She didn't even know Karen's name yet. Tommy was busy too. He'd spend hours exploring the yard, chasing butterflies, or swinging on that porch swing. "This is the best house ever," he'd yell, his voice echoing down the street. Sarah would peek out the window and wave, feeling proud. They'd waited so long for this, a place to call their own. The swing was like a cherry on top of a sundae. It made everything sweeter. But while Sarah and Tommy were busy settling in, Karen was busy too, busy being mad. She'd sit on her porch with a cup of tea, staring at that swing like it was a monster. She'd mutter to herself, "That's not allowed. Nope, not in my neighborhood." She'd flip through her HOA rule book, looking for something, anything that said porch swings were against the rules. She didn't find it right away, but that didn't stop her. Karen was the kind of person who made up her own rules if she didn't like something. And she really didn't like Sarah's swing. One day, while Sarah was inside making sandwiches for lunch, Karen took a closer look. She marched across the street, her sandals slapping the pavement. She stood right in front of Sarah's porch, hands on her hips, staring at the swing. It rocked a little in the breeze, empty and quiet. Karen frowned. Too big, she said to herself. Too red. Too swingy. She didn't know what too swingy meant, but it sounded bad, and that was enough for her. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Click. Then another. Click. She wanted proof that the swing was trouble. Sarah didn't see any of this. She was too busy spreading peanut butter on bread, humming a little tune. Tommy was in the backyard, digging in the dirt with a stick. They had no idea Karen was out there, plotting against their swing. They had no idea she was about to start a fight they didn't even want. But that's how it goes sometimes, right? You're just living your life, minding your own business, and someone else decides to make it a big deal. Let's rewind a little and talk about Sarah. She's not the kind of person who likes trouble. Growing up, she was quiet and kind. She'd help her friends with homework or share her snacks at lunch. She worked hard too, really hard. For years, she saved every extra dollar she could. She'd skip buying new shoes or fancy coffee just so she could put money in a jar labeled house fund. Tommy was little back then, toddling around in diapers, and Sarah would tell him, "One day, buddy, we're gonna have a house with a yard and a swing." He'd clap his chubby hands and giggle, not really understanding. But Sarah meant it. That dream kept her going. Now, here she was, in that house, with that swing. It wasn't fancy, just a simple wooden seat with ropes tied to the porch roof. But to Sarah, it was perfect. It was a sign that all her hard work paid off. She'd sit on it at night after Tommy went to bed, rocking back and forth, looking at the stars. "We did it," she'd whisper. She didn't care if the paint on the house was chipped or if the kitchen was small. The swing made it home. Tommy loved it just as much. He'd swing so high his toes almost touched the porch roof. "I'm flying, Mom," he'd shout, and Sarah would laugh. Sometimes they'd sit on it together, eating popsicles, letting the juice drip onto their shirts. It was their special spot, a place where they could just be happy. They didn't know it yet, but that happiness was about to get tested. Back to Karen. She wasn't always grumpy, you know. Once upon a time, she was a regular person. She moved to Oakwood Lane 10 years ago with her husband, Bob. They liked the quiet streets and the pretty houses. But Bob moved away a few years back, and Karen changed. She got lonely, and when she got lonely, she got bossy. The HOA gave her something to do. She'd walk around with her rule book, telling people what to fix. "Your grass is too long," she'd say. "Your trash cans are out too early." People didn't argue much, they just nodded and did what she wanted. Karen liked that. It made her feel important. But Sarah's swing? That was different. Karen couldn't figure out why it bugged her so much. Maybe it was because Sarah was new and didn't ask permission. Maybe it was because Tommy's giggles were loud enough to hear from her porch. Or maybe Karen just didn't like seeing someone so happy when she wasn't. Whatever it was, she decided that swing had to go. And she was going to make sure it happened. Sarah, though. She didn't have a clue. She didn't know Karen was watching her every move. She didn't know Karen was taking pictures and muttering about rules. She was too busy unpacking Tommy's superhero toys and figuring out where to put the lamp. The first few days in the house were a blur, boxes everywhere, pizza for dinner, and lots of giggling with Tommy. "This is our adventure," she'd tell him, and he'd nod, his eyes wide. One afternoon, while Tommy was napping, Sarah sat on the swing with a glass of lemonade. The sun was warm, and the air smelled like flowers. She closed her eyes and rocked, feeling peaceful. Across the street, Karen watched from her window, her curtains pulled back just enough to peek. "That swing," she grumbled. "It's got to go." She didn't know Sarah yet. She didn't know how strong Sarah could be. And Sarah didn't know Karen was about to turn her quiet little life into a big, messy storm. What was it about that swing that made Karen so mad? Was it really just the rules, or was it something else? And why didn't Sarah see the trouble coming? Oh, friends, this is just the beginning. Something big is brewing in Oakwood Lane, and it's going to surprise everyone, even Karen. Want to know what happens next? Stick around, because this story's about to get wild. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a neighbor like Karen? Let's find out together what she does next. So, there they were, Sarah and Tommy living their happy little life in their new house. The sun kept shining, the birds kept singing, and the porch swing kept rocking. Every day felt like a new adventure for them. Sarah would wake up early, before Tommy even opened his eyes, and tiptoe to the kitchen. She'd make coffee black with no sugar, because that's how she liked it, and then she'd sit on the swing. The air was cool in the mornings, and the street was quiet. She'd sip her coffee and think, this is ours. We made it. Tommy would stumble out of bed a little later, his hair sticking up like a bird's nest. Morning, Mom, he'd say, rubbing his eyes. Sarah would smile and pull him onto the swing with her. They'd sit there together, still in their pajamas, watching the neighborhood wake up. A dog would bark down the street. A car would roll by, heading to work. Kids would start spilling out of houses, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to the bus stop. It was normal, everyday stuff, but to Sarah and Tommy, it felt special. This was their street now. Their home. Across the street, though, Karen wasn't feeling so warm and fuzzy. Nope, not one bit. She'd wake up early too, but not to enjoy the morning. She'd wake up to watch. She'd pull her curtains back just a tiny bit and peek out her window. Her house was bigger than Sarah's, with fancy white shutters and a perfect green lawn. But Karen didn't care about that right now. All she cared about was that swing. Every time she saw it, her frown got deeper. Every time she heard it creak, her hands balled into fists. That thing, she'd mutter. That awful thing. Karen wasn't always like this, you know. Back when she first moved to Oakwood Lane, she'd smile at people. She'd wave to the kids riding bikes and chat with the mailman about the weather. But that was a long time ago, before Bob left. After he was gone, Karen stopped smiling so much. She stopped talking to people unless it was to tell them what they were doing wrong. The HOA became her whole world. She'd spend hours reading the rules, underlining them with a red pen. She'd walk around the neighborhood with her notebook, looking for trouble. And when she found it, she'd fix it, or at least, she'd try. Sarah's swing, though. That was a tough one. Karen couldn't find a rule that said no porch swings. She looked and looked, flipping through page after page. There were rules about fences nothing taller than 4 feet. Rules about paint no bright colors like pink or yellow. Rules about trash cans put them away by 8 p.m. But swings. Nothing. Not a single word. That made Karen mad. If there wasn't a rule, she'd make one up. She was the HOA queen, after all. She could do that, right? While Karen was glaring and plotting, Sarah was busy making their house a home. She unpacked box after box, finding spots for everything. Tommy's toy cars went under his bed. Her favorite blue mug went on a shelf by the sink. She hung a picture in the living room, a silly drawing Tommy made of them holding hands under a rainbow. That's us, he said, pointing at it proudly. Sarah hugged him tight. Yup, that's us, buddy. The porch swing stayed busy too. After lunch, Tommy would run outside and climb on it. He'd swing back and forth, pretending he was a pirate on a ship. Arg, matey, he'd yell, waving an imaginary sword. Sarah would watch from the doorstep, laughing. Sometimes she'd join him, and they'd pretend the swing was a rocket ship zooming to the moon. Blast off! Tommy would shout, and Sarah would make whooshing noises. It was their little game, and it made them both happy. But Karen didn't hear the laughter. She didn't see the fun. All she saw was that swing moving, moving, moving. Every creak was like a poke in her side. Every giggle from Tommy was like a siren in her ears. She'd sit in her living room, her tea getting cold, and stare out the window. They think they can just do whatever they want, she'd grumble. Not here. Not in my neighborhood. One afternoon, Sarah decided to meet some neighbors. She baked cookies, chocolate chip, Tommy's favorite, and put them on a plate. Let's say hi to people, she told him. Tommy grabbed a cookie and nodded, his mouth already full. They walked next door first, to a yellow house with a big oak tree in the yard. A lady named Mrs. Jenkins answered the door. She was old, with white hair and a kind smile. Well, hello there, she said. New neighbors, huh? Sarah smiled back. I'm Sarah, and this is Tommy. We just moved in. She held out the cookies. Mrs. Jenkins took one and patted Tommy's head. What a sweet boy. Welcome to Oakwood Lane. It's a nice place, well, mostly. She glanced across the street at Karen's house and lowered her voice. Watch out for that one. She's got a nose for trouble. Sarah tilted her head. Who? Mrs. Jenkins nodded toward Karen's porch. Karen Baxter. Runs the HOA like it's her kingdom. Don't cross her, or she'll make a fuss. Sarah laughed a little. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. We're just settling in. Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. Tommy munched his cookie, not really listening. He was too busy eyeing a squirrel in the tree. Sarah thanked Mrs. Jenkins and moved on to the next house. They met Mr. Lopez, who had a fluffy dog named Max. They met the Carter family, who had twin girls Tommy's age. Everyone was nice, and everyone took a cookie. But almost everyone said the same thing, watch out for Karen. Sarah started to wonder. Who was this lady? And why did people talk about her like she was a storm cloud? When they got back home, Sarah sat on the swing to think. Tommy ran inside to play with his toys, leaving her alone with the breeze. She rocked back and 63035. Sarah rocked back and forth, feeling the breeze on her face. She didn't care if the paint was chipped or the kitchen was small. The swing made it home. Tommy loved it too. He'd swing high, his toes almost touching the roof. I'm flying, Mom, he'd shout, and Sarah would laugh. Sometimes they'd sit together, eating popsicles, juice dripping on their shirts. It was their spot, a happy place. But Karen didn't see the fun. She saw trouble. Every creak, every giggle, it bugged her. She'd sit, tea cold, staring. They can't do what they want, she'd grumble. Not in my neighborhood. One day, Sarah baked cookies, chocolate chip, Tommy's favorite, and they met the neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins, old with white hair, took a cookie. Welcome. It's nice here mostly. Watch out for Karen. She's trouble. Sarah laughed. I'm sure it's fine. Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. Don't say I didn't warn you. They met Mr. Lopez with his dog Max, and the Carter twins. Everyone said, watch out for Karen. Sarah wondered. Who was this lady? Why was she a storm cloud? Back home, Sarah sat on the swing. Tommy played inside. She rocked, thinking. The breeze was soft, the flowers smelled sweet. Across the street, Karen peeked out her window. That swing, she muttered. It's got to go. She didn't know Sarah yet. Didn't know how strong she was. And Sarah didn't know a storm was coming. What made Karen so mad? Was it the rules or something else? Why didn't Sarah see it? Oh, friends, this is just the start. Something big's brewing in Oakwood Lane. Want more? Stick around, it's gonna get wild. Tell me, ever had a Karen neighbor? Let's chat. Okay, friends, let's dive back into our story. Things are about to get a little bumpy in Oakwood Lane. A few days had passed since Sarah and Tommy moved into their new house. The sun was still shining, the birds were still chirping, and the porch swing was still swinging. It was a happy little spot for Sarah and her 8-year-old son, Tommy. They loved it so much. But not everyone felt the same way. Oh no, trouble was coming, and it had a name, Karen Baxter. It all started on a bright afternoon. Sarah was outside, standing on the porch, pushing Tommy on the swing. He giggled as he went back and forth, his sneakers kicking the air. Higher, Mom, he shouted, his messy black hair bouncing. Sarah smiled big and gave him an extra push. The swing creaked a little, but it was a happy sound like a song they both loved. The red cushion on the swing bounced too, making it look cozy and fun. Sarah felt so proud. This was their home, their swing, their fresh start. But then, across the street, a door slammed. Bam! Sarah turned her head and saw Karen marching over. Karen's arms were crossed tight, like she was hugging herself really hard. Her lips were pressed together so much they almost disappeared. She looked mad, like really mad. Her sandals slapped the pavement with every step, and her eyes were locked on the swing. Sarah stopped pushing Tommy and tilted her head. Who was this lady? What was her problem? Karen stopped right in front of the porch, pointing at the swing like it was a pile of stinky trash. That swing's an eyesore, she snapped. Her voice was sharp, like a teacher yelling at a kid who forgot their homework. The HOA rules say no porch swings unless they're approved. Did you even read the handbook? Sarah blinked. She wasn't ready for this. I didn't know I needed permission, she said, trying to be nice. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want a fight. It's just a swing. She shrugged a little, hoping Karen would calm down. Tommy sat still on the swing now, looking at Karen with big, curious eyes. He didn't say anything, but he held onto the ropes tight. Karen huffed, loud and dramatic. It was the kind of huff you'd hear from someone who's really annoyed. Just a swing, she said, her voice getting louder. It's a safety hazard. And it ruins the look of my neighborhood. She waved her arms around, like she was trying to show the whole street how bad the swing was. Her face turned a little red, and her eyes got narrow. She wasn't just mad, she was super mad. Sarah stayed calm on the outside. She didn't yell back or make a face. But inside, oh, she was starting to get annoyed. She'd worked so hard for this house. For years, she saved every penny she could. She didn't buy fancy clothes or treats for herself just so she could give Tommy a home with a yard and a swing. And now this lady Karen was acting like it was a big crime. Sarah didn't get it. Why was a little swing such a fuss? But Karen wasn't done. Nope, not even close. She yanked her phone out of her pocket like it was a weapon. She held it up and started taking pictures of the swing. Click. 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 The sound was fast and loud, like a tiny machine gun. I'm reporting this immediately, she muttered, her voice low but mean. She didn't even look at Sarah, just kept snapping pictures, moving around to get every angle. The swing creaked as Tommy shifted, watching her. Sarah stood there, her hands on her hips, watching Karen storm around. What's she doing, Mom? Tommy whispered, his voice small. Sarah shook her head a little. I don't know, buddy, she said quietly. Just stay there. She didn't want Tommy to worry, but she was starting to wonder herself. What kind of trouble was this lady cooking up? Was it really about the swing or something else? Karen finally stopped taking pictures. She shoved her phone back in her pocket and glared at Sarah. You'll hear from the HOA soon, she said, like it was a big threat. Then she turned around and marched back across the street, her sandals slapping even louder than before. Sarah watched her go, her eyebrows scrunched up. She didn't say anything, just stood there, thinking. Karen disappeared into her house, and the door slammed again. Bam! Tommy hopped off the swing and ran to Sarah's side. Why's she so mad, Mom? He asked, looking up at her with his big brown eyes. Sarah put her arm around him and sighed. I'm not sure, Tommy. Maybe she just doesn't like swings. She tried to smile, but inside, her stomach felt a little twisty. She didn't like fights. She didn't like trouble. All she wanted was to enjoy her new house with her son. Was that too much to ask? Inside Karen's house, things were different. Karen plopped down on her couch, her phone still in her hand. She scrolled through the pictures. She took pictures of the swing from the front, the side, even underneath. Proof, she said to herself, nodding. This is proof. She didn't care that Sarah seemed nice or that Tommy was just a kid. To Karen, that swing was a rule breaker. And in Oakwood Lane, rules were everything. Karen grabbed her HOA handbook from the coffee table. It was a thick book with tiny words and lots of pages. She flipped through it, her fingers moving fast. Swings, swings, she muttered, looking for something, anything that said Sarah couldn't have one. She didn't find it right away, but that didn't stop her. It's a safety hazard, she said out loud, even though no one was there to hear her. It could fall. It could hurt someone. And it's ugly. She slammed the book shut and nodded again. She'd make it a rule if she had to. Back outside, Sarah and Tommy went inside for a snack. Sarah made peanut butter sandwiches, Tommy's favorite, and they sat at the kitchen table. That lady was loud, Tommy said, his mouth full of bread. Sarah laughed a little. Yeah, she was. But don't worry about it, okay? It's just a swing. She'll get over it. Tommy nodded, but he didn't look so sure. He liked the swing a lot. What if that lady took it away? Sarah didn't say it out loud, but she was thinking the same thing. She didn't know much about the HOA or Karen. She'd heard the neighbors say, Watch out for Karen, but she didn't think it'd be this fast. She'd only been in the house a few days. She took a bite of her sandwich and chewed slowly. It'll be fine, she told herself. She's just grumpy. That's all. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The next day, things got weirder. Sarah was watering the flowers in the front yard when she saw Karen again. This time, Karen had a tape measure. She walked right up to the swing while Sarah watched and started measuring it. She stretched the tape from one side to the other, then up to the porch roof. Too big, she mumbled. Way too big. She wrote something in her little notebook and kept going. Sarah put down the watering can and walked over. Hi, she said, trying to be friendly. What are you doing? Karen didn't even look up. Checking this swing, she said, like it was obvious. It's against the rules. Sarah frowned. But I thought you said I needed permission. Now it's too big. Karen stood up straight and stared at her. It's both, she snapped. No permission, and it's too big. You'll see. Then she turned and walked away again. Sarah stood there, confused. She didn't get it. The swing wasn't that big, it fit on the porch just fine. And how was it a safety hazard? It was sturdy. She'd checked it herself when she tied it up. She shook her head and went back to her flowers. Weird, she muttered. Tommy peeked out the door. She's back, he asked. Sarah nodded. Yup. Don't worry, though. She's just being herself, I guess. But Karen wasn't done yet. Later that afternoon, she came back with a camera, not just her phone, but a real camera with a big lens. She stood in the street and took more pictures. Click. 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 Sarah watched from the window, her arms crossed. What now, she said to herself. Tommy ran up beside her. She's taking pictures again, he said, pointing. Sarah sighed. Yeah, she sure is. Karen didn't stop there. The next morning, Sarah found a note taped to her front door. It was in big, messy handwriting, take down that swing, or you'll regret it. No name, but Sarah knew who wrote it. She showed it to Tommy. Look at this, she said, trying to laugh. She's really serious about this swing thing. Tommy giggled, but his eyes looked worried. What's she gonna do, Mom? Sarah hugged him. Nothing big, buddy. It's just a note. We're okay. Inside, though, Sarah was starting to feel something else. Not just annoyed, mad. She'd worked too hard for this house, this life, to let some grumpy lady ruin it. She didn't want a fight, but she wasn't going to let Karen push her around either. Little did Karen know, Sarah wasn't just some quiet newbie who'd give up easy. Sarah was tough. She'd been through hard stuff before, saving money, raising Tommy alone, and she wasn't scared of a little trouble. Karen didn't see that yet. She thought Sarah was soft, someone she could boss around. She sat in her house, looking at her pictures and her note, smiling a little. This'll teach her, she said to herself. No one breaks my rules. She didn't know Sarah was tougher than she looked. She didn't know her big plan was about to hit a wall. The tension was growing, friends. Karen was pushing, and Sarah was holding steady, but how long could that last? What was Karen going to do next? And what would Sarah do when she'd had enough? Oh, this is getting good. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone told you to take down your swing? Let's keep going, this story's just heating up. So, there was Sarah, standing on her porch, holding that mean little note from Karen. Take down that swing, or you'll regret it, it said in big, messy letters. Tommy peeked over her shoulder, his eyes wide. She's really mad about our swing, huh? He said, his voice small. Sarah nodded and tried to smile. Yeah, buddy, she is. But don't worry, we're not taking it down just because she says so. She crumpled the note into a ball and tossed it into the trash can by the door. It's our swing, she told him. We earned it. Tommy grinned and ran back to the swing, hopping on it like nothing happened. Push me again, Mom, he called. Sarah laughed and walked over, giving him a big push. The swing creaked and swayed, and for a minute, everything felt normal again. The sun was warm, the air smelled like grass, and Tommy's giggles filled the yard. But Sarah couldn't shake that twisty feeling in her stomach. Karen wasn't giving up, and that note? It felt like a warning. Across the street, Karen was busy. She sat at her kitchen table, her phone and camera in front of her. Pictures of the swing were spread out everywhere, some from the front, some from the side, even one she took while crouching down low. She tapped her pen on the table, thinking hard. "This swing's gotta go," she muttered. "It's breaking the rules, or it will when I'm done." She grabbed her HOA handbook again and flipped through it, her eyes squinting at the tiny words. Still no rule about porch swings. "Doesn't matter," she said to herself. "I'll make it a problem anyway." Karen picked up her phone and started typing an email. Her fingers moved fast, tap tap tap. She wrote to the HOA board, 3 other people who helped make the neighborhood rules. "Dear board," she typed. "We have a big issue. The new lady at 123 Oakwood Lane put up a swing without permission. It's ugly and dangerous. We need to stop this now." She added a bunch of the pictures she took and hit send. Then she leaned back in her chair, smiling a little. "That'll get her," she said. Back at Sarah's house, the day went on like usual. She and Tommy finished their snack and played in the yard. Sarah pulled some weeds while Tommy chased a butterfly with a stick. The swing sat there, quiet for now, its red cushion bright in the sunlight. Sarah kept thinking about Karen, though. That lady was loud and bossy, and she didn't seem to care that Sarah was new. Maybe she's just having a bad day, Sarah told herself. She'll forget about it soon. But even as she said it, she didn't really believe it. The next morning, Sarah woke up early. She made her coffee and stepped outside with her mug, like she did every day. The street was quiet, no kids, no cars, just the soft sound of birds. She sat on the swing and rocked a little, sipping her coffee. It was her favorite part of the day, calm and peaceful. But then she heard it, slap, slap, slap. Sandals on the pavement. She looked up, and there was Karen again, marching across the street. This time, Karen had a clipboard. She stopped in front of the porch and started writing stuff down, her pen scratching loud on the paper. Sarah watched her, confused. "Good morning," she said, trying to be nice again. Karen didn't look up. "This swing's still here," she said, like Sarah didn't already know that. "I told you it's against the rules." Sarah took a deep breath. "You said I needed permission," she replied. "I'll check the handbook later, okay? I've been busy unpacking." Karen's head snapped up, and she glared at Sarah. "Busy," she said, her voice sharp. "Too busy to follow the rules? That's no excuse." She pointed at the swing with her pen. "This is a safety hazard. It could fall and hurt someone like your kid." Sarah's eyes got narrow. She didn't like that. "It's not going to fall," she said, her voice still calm but firmer now. "I tied it up myself. It's safe." Karen huffed again, even louder this time. "You think you know better than me," she snapped. "I've lived here 10 years. I run this neighborhood. That swing's ugly, and it doesn't belong here." She scribbled something else on her clipboard and shook her head. "You'll see. The HOA's going to make you take it down." Then she turned and stomped off, her clipboard bouncing in her hand. Sarah sat there, her coffee getting cold. She didn't move for a minute, just rocked the swing and watched Karen go. Tommy poked his head out the door, still in his pajamas. "Was that her again?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Yup. She really doesn't like our swing." Tommy frowned. "Why not?" "It's fun." Sarah shrugged. "I don't know, buddy. Some people just like to complain." But inside, Sarah was getting madder. She didn't want to fight, but Karen was making it hard to stay nice. Calling the swing ugly? Saying it could hurt Tommy? That wasn't fair. Sarah worked hard to make this house a happy place for her son. She saved money for years, skipping fun stuff like movies or ice cream just to buy it. And now this lady was acting like Sarah didn't belong? It didn't feel right. That afternoon, Karen came back again. This time, she brought a tape measure and her camera. She didn't even say hi, just started measuring the swing like she owned the place. She stretched the tape from one rope to the other, then up to the roof. "Still too big," she mumbled. She snapped more pictures, click, 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 and wrote more notes. Sarah was inside, washing dishes, when she saw her through the window. "Oh, come on," she said, drying her hands on a towel. She stepped outside. "Hey, Karen," she said, keeping her voice steady. "What's going on now?" Karen didn't stop measuring. "I'm documenting this," she said, like it was a big job. "The HOA needs proof." Sarah crossed her arms. "Proof of what?" "It's just a swing." Karen stood up and pointed at her. "It's a problem. You don't get it, do you? This neighborhood has standards." Sarah took a slow breath. "I get it," she said. "You don't like the swing. But it's not hurting anyone. Can't we just talk about this?" Karen laughed a short, mean laugh. "Talk? No. You take it down, or the HOA will handle it." She grabbed her stuff and walked off, leaving Sarah standing there, her hands clenched. Tommy ran out, holding a toy car. "She's gone?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "For now." She looked at the swing, then at Tommy. "Don't worry, okay? We're keeping it." Tommy smiled big. "Good. I love it." He climbed on and swung a little, but Sarah didn't push him this time. She was too busy thinking. Karen wasn't giving up. She kept coming back, day after day. One morning, she left another note: "Last warning, remove the swing." Another day, she stood in the street with binoculars, staring at it. Sarah started closing the curtains so she wouldn't see her all the time. But it didn't help much. Every slap of those sandals made her stomach twist. The neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady next door, stopped by with a plate of muffins. "Saw Karen yelling again," she said, shaking her head. "She's got it out for that swing." Sarah sighed. "Yeah, she does. I don't know why it's such a big deal." Mrs. Jenkins patted her arm. "That's just Karen. She picks fights. Don't let her scare you." Sarah smiled a little. "I won't. Thanks." But it wasn't easy. Karen's words stuck in Sarah's head. Safety hazard. Ugly. My neighborhood. Sarah didn't feel scared, she felt mad. She wasn't a pushover. She'd raised Tommy by herself, worked long hours, and built a good life. She wasn't going to let Karen ruin it over a swing. Little did Karen know, Sarah had a quiet strength inside her, a toughness that didn't show until it had to. Karen didn't see that. She thought Sarah was weak, someone she could boss around with notes and pictures. She sat in her house, emailing the HOA again, planning her next move. "They'll back me up," she told herself. "That swing's history." She didn't know Sarah wasn't going to back down so easy. She didn't know her own trouble was closer than she thought. The air in Oakwood Lane was getting thick with tension, friends. Karen was pushing harder, and Sarah was holding her ground, but something had to give. What would Karen do next? How long could Sarah stay calm? "Oh, this is getting exciting. Tell me, what would you say to Karen if she told you to take down your swing?" Let's keep going, this story's heating up fast. Alright, friends, let's keep this story going. Things in Oakwood Lane are about to get even stranger. Sarah and Tommy were still loving their new house and that cozy porch swing, but Karen? Oh, she was making life weird, and not in a fun way. Over the next week, the trouble kept growing, and little hints started popping up that something big was coming. Get ready, this part's full of surprises. It all started a few days after Karen's first big fuss. Sarah was trying to keep things normal. She'd unpack boxes, make snacks for Tommy, and sit on the swing every morning with her coffee. Tommy would play outside, swinging high or running around the yard. They were happy, but Karen wasn't. Nope, not at all. She kept showing up, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. One day, Sarah was sweeping the porch when she heard those sandals again, slap, slap, slap. She looked up, and there was Karen, marching across the street with a tape measure in her hand. Her face was all scrunched up, like she'd just eaten a sour lemon. She didn't say hi or anything, just went straight to the swing and started measuring it. She stretched the tape from one rope to the other, then up to the porch roof. "Still too big," she mumbled, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah put down her broom and watched. "What are you doing now?" she asked, trying to sound nice. Karen didn't even look at her. "Checking this swing," she said, like it was a super important job. It's breaking the rules. Sarah sighed. You keep saying that, but I checked the handbook. There's nothing about swings. Karen's head snapped up, and she glared. Doesn't matter, she snapped. It's a problem, and I'll prove it. Then she wrote something in her little notebook and marched back to her house. Sarah shook her head. Weird, she said to herself. She picked up the broom and kept sweeping, but her mind was spinning. Why was Karen so stuck on this? It was just a swing. Tommy ran out from the backyard, his hands dirty from digging. Was that her again? He asked. Sarah nodded. Yup. She's measuring the swing now. Tommy frowned. Why? Sarah shrugged. I don't know, buddy. She's just funny like that. The next day, Karen was back, but this time, she didn't come over. She just stood on her own porch, arms crossed, staring at Sarah's house. Her eyes were locked on the swing, like she was trying to make it disappear with her brain. Sarah was watering the flowers out front and caught her looking. Karen didn't move, just kept glaring. Sarah waved, trying to be friendly. Hi, she called. Karen didn't wave back. She turned and went inside, slamming her door. Bam. Tommy was sitting on the swing, kicking his legs. She's creepy, Mom, he said. Sarah laughed a little. Maybe a little. Don't worry, though, she's not hurting anything. But inside, Sarah was starting to feel funny about it. Karen wasn't yelling now, but that staring? It was spooky. What was she planning? Then, one afternoon, things got even weirder. Sarah was inside making dinner spaghetti, Tommy's favorite, when she heard a knock on the door. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened it. No one was there. But taped to the door was a note. It was written in big, angry letters, "Remove that swing, or I'll make sure you regret it." Sarah pulled it off and read it out loud. Tommy peeked over her shoulder. Who wrote that? He asked. Sarah crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Guess who? She said, rolling her eyes. She tried to laugh it off like it was a silly joke. She's really serious about this swing thing, she told Tommy, ruffling his hair. But Tommy didn't laugh. He looked up at her with his big brown eyes. Mom, why does that lady hate us? He asked, his voice quiet. Sarah stopped smiling. She didn't have an answer, at least, not a good one. She doesn't hate us, buddy, she said, hugging him. She just doesn't like the swing. It's okay. But Tommy didn't look so sure, and Sarah felt a little twist in her heart. She didn't want him to worry. That night, after Tommy went to bed, Sarah sat on the swing by herself. The stars were out, twinkling in the dark sky. She rocked back and forth, thinking. Karen's note kept popping into her head. Regret it, she whispered to herself. What's that supposed to mean? She didn't like fights, but she wasn't scared either. She'd worked too hard for this house, saved every penny for years, to let some grumpy lady ruin it. Still, she didn't know what Karen was up to, and that made her wonder. The next morning, something odd happened. Sarah was sipping her coffee on the swing, like always. The street was super quiet, no kids, no dogs, just stillness. Then she heard a low rumble. She looked up and saw a police car rolling by her house, slow and quiet. Its lights weren't on, but it moved like it was looking for something. It crept past her porch and parked a few houses down, near the end of the street. Sarah tilted her head. Huh, she said. Wonder what's going on. She didn't think much of it at first. Maybe someone called about a lost cat or a loud dog. She took another sip of coffee and kept rocking. But then she glanced across the street and saw something funny. Karen was peeking out her blinds. Not just looking, peeking, like she didn't want anyone to see her. Her fingers held the blinds open just a tiny bit, and her eyes were big and nervous. Sarah frowned. What's she up to? She muttered. Karen looked, scared. That didn't make sense. She was the one yelling and leaving notes, not Sarah. Sarah watched her for a second, but then the blind snapped shut. Karen was gone. The police car sat there, quiet, and Sarah shrugged. Weird, she said again. She finished her coffee and went inside to wake Tommy up for breakfast. She had no idea something big was brewing, and it wasn't just about the swing. Over the next few days, Karen kept acting strange. One morning, she walked by Sarah's house with a big flashlight like the kind you use for camping. She shined it at the swing, even though it was daytime and sunny. Sarah saw her from the window and laughed. "What's she doing now?" she said to Tommy, who was eating cereal at the table. Tommy giggled. "Maybe she thinks it's haunted." Sarah grinned. "Maybe." But deep down, she wondered why Karen was so obsessed. Another day, Karen came by with a ladder. A ladder. She set it up in the street right in front of Sarah's house and climbed up a few steps. She held her camera high and took more pictures of the swing. Click. Click. Sarah stepped outside. "Hey, Karen," she called. "What's with the ladder?" Karen didn't answer, just kept snapping pictures. Then she climbed down, folded the ladder, and walked away. Sarah shook her head. "This lady's nuts," she said to herself. Tommy was starting to notice more too. "She's always here," he said one afternoon, sitting on the swing. "Why doesn't she leave us alone?" Sarah sat next to him and rocked a little. "I don't know, buddy," she said. "Maybe she's lonely or something." Tommy looked at her. "Then why's she mean?" Sarah didn't have an answer for that. She just hugged him tight. "Don't let it bug you, okay? We've got our swing, and that's what matters." But the police car thing stuck in Sarah's mind. She saw it again the next day rolling by slow, parking down the street. And every time, Karen peeked out her blinds, looking jumpy. Sarah started to wonder. Was something else going on? Why was Karen so nervous? She didn't connect the dots yet, but those little hints were piling up like puzzle pieces. One evening, Sarah talked to Mrs. Jenkins, the nice old lady next door. They were in the yard, pulling weeds together. "Karen's been weird lately," Sarah said. "She keeps measuring my swing and leaving notes." Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "That's Karen for you. She loves trouble." But, she stopped and looked around, then leaned closer. "I heard something funny. Someone said the cops have been watching her house." Sarah's eyes got big. "Watching her? Why?" Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. "Don't know. Maybe she did something she shouldn't. She's got that big shed out back, built it years ago. Never got a permit for it, I bet." Sarah tilted her head. "A shed?" Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "Yup. Big ugly thing. She acts like she's perfect, but she breaks rules too." Sarah didn't say anything, just kept pulling weeds. But her brain was buzzing. A shed? Cops? Karen acting scared? It didn't all fit together yet, but it made her think. She didn't know it, but Karen was about to make her boldest move yet. "That note, remove that swing, or I'll make sure you regret it," wasn't just talk. Karen had a plan, and she thought it'd win. She didn't know it was going to backfire big time. The tension was growing, friends. Karen was getting weirder, and Sarah was starting to see little clues. What was Karen hiding? Why were the cops around? And what was her big move going to be? Oh, this is getting juicy. Tell me in the comments, what do you think Karen's up to? Let's keep going, this story's about to twist in the wildest way. Okay, friends, get ready, this is the big moment you've been waiting for. The story's been building up in Oakwood Lane, with Sarah and her swing on one side and Karen making trouble on the other. Things have been weird, tense, and a little spooky, but now it's all about to explode in the wildest way. It's Thursday afternoon, and everything's going to change. Let's jump in, this is the climax and the big reveal. It was a sunny Thursday, the kind of day where the sky's all blue and the air feels warm. Sarah was chilling out on her porch swing, her favorite spot in the whole world. She had a book in her hands, a fun one about pirates and treasure, and she was rocking back and forth, nice and slow. The swing creaked a little, like it always did, and the red cushion felt soft under her. Tommy was inside, playing with his toy cars, making vroom vroom noises. Everything seemed calm and happy, just how Sarah liked it. But then bam, a loud voice cut through the quiet. It was Karen, yelling from across the street. Her voice was shrill, like a whistle, and super dramatic, like she was in a movie. Sarah's head popped up, and she put her book down fast. What was going on? She leaned forward on the swing and listened. Karen had her phone pressed to her ear, pacing back and forth on her porch. Yes, 911, she shouted. There's a dangerous situation here. This woman's swing is a menace, and she refuses to take it down. I demand you send someone now. Sarah's jaw dropped. Literally it fell open like a trapdoor. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Karen called the cops? Over a swing? Her swing? The one she and Tommy loved so much. She blinked hard, thinking maybe she heard wrong. But nope, Karen kept going, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. It's a safety hazard, she yelled into the phone. It's ugly. Do something about it. Sarah stood up from the swing, her book sliding to the floor with a thud. She put her hands on her hips and stared across the street, totally shocked. She's nuts, she whispered to herself. She really called 911. Her heart started beating faster, not because she was scared, but because she couldn't believe how crazy this was. She'd dealt with Karen's notes and measuring and glaring, but this was next level bonkers. Before Sarah could even figure out what to do, like maybe yell back or call Tommy outside, something wild happened. 2 police officers stepped out from behind Karen's own hedge. Yup, right there in her yard. They'd been hiding, quiet as mice, the whole time Karen was shouting. Sarah hadn't seen them, not even a peek, because the hedge was tall and bushy. But there they were, in their blue uniforms, with badges shining in the sun. Karen didn't see them at first. She was too busy yelling into her phone, waving her free hand like she was swatting a fly. Hurry up, she screeched. This swing's dangerous. But then one of the officers cleared his throat. It was a loud ahem, and it stopped Karen cold. She froze, mid-yell, her phone still stuck to her ear. Her eyes got huge, like saucers, and she turned super slow to look at them. The first officer, a tall guy with a mustache, raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, he said, his voice calm but firm. We're not here for a swing. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stood there, stuck, like a statue. The second officer, a shorter lady with a ponytail, stepped forward, holding up a stack of papers. We're here for you, she said, pointing at Karen. Sarah watched from her porch, her eyes wide. What was happening? The lady officer kept talking. We've had complaints about your illegal shed out back, she said. Built without permits. And it's a fire hazard. She flipped through the papers, showing some pictures of a big, messy shed in Karen's backyard. It was ugly wood, all splintery, with junk piled around it. Sarah tilted her head. A shed? Karen had a shed? Karen's face went white, like ghost white. The color just drained right out of her cheeks. Her phone slipped a little in her hand, but she caught it before it fell. What? She stammered, her voice shaky now. My shed? That's not, this isn't about. She pointed across the street at Sarah's swing, her hand trembling. It's about that. That swing's the problem. The mustache officer shook his head. Nope, he said. We've been watching your place for days. Neighbors called us about the shed. Said it's been there for years, no permits, and it's falling apart. He crossed his arms. You calling 911 just made it easier to find you. The lady officer nodded. Yup. We were already here, checking it out. Sarah's jaw dropped again, this time so far it almost hit the porch floor. She couldn't believe it. Karen, the lady who'd been yelling about rules and safety, had her own big secret? An illegal shed? And the cops were here for her, not the swing? Sarah stepped closer to the porch rail, leaning out to hear better. This was too wild. Karen started sputtering, like a car that wouldn't start. But wait, no, she said, her words all jumbled. The swing. It's dangerous. You need to. The mustache officer held up a hand to stop her. Ma'am, we're not here for a swing, he said again, slow and clear. We're here because your shed's against the law. And it's not safe. He pointed toward her backyard. Let's go take a look. Karen's eyes darted around, like she was looking for a way to run. But there was no escape. The officers were right there, calm but serious. Sarah watched, still stunned, as the truth hit her like a big splash of cold water. Karen wasn't perfect. She'd been breaking rules too, all while picking on Sarah's swing. And now, her own 911 call had turned on her like a boomerang. The lady officer glanced over at Sarah and gave a little nod. Nice swing, by the way, she said with a grin. Sarah blinked, then smiled back. Thanks, she said, her voice a little shaky from the shock. The mustache officer chuckled. Looks sturdy to me, he added, then turned back to Karen. Come on, ma'am. Let's check that shed. Karen didn't move at first. She just stood there, her phone dangling in her hand, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. This isn't fair, she finally yelled. I'm the HOA boss. I make the rules. The lady officer shook her head. Not this time, she said. Rules apply to you too. She waved toward the backyard. Let's go. Sarah couldn't help it, she giggled. Just a little one, but it slipped out. She clapped her hand over her mouth, not wanting to make it worse. But oh, this was crazy. Karen had called the cops to get rid of the swing, but instead, they were here for her. All those days of measuring, glaring, and leaving notes, and it was Karen's own mess that got her caught. The officers started walking toward Karen's backyard, and Karen had no choice but to follow. She dragged her feet, still sputtering. This is ridiculous, she shouted. That swing's the real problem. But the officers didn't listen. They disappeared around the side of her house, leaving Sarah alone on her porch. Sarah sat back down on the swing, her book still on the floor. She picked it up and held it, but she didn't read. She was too busy thinking. The police car she'd seen rolling by. The way Karen peeked out her blinds, all nervous. It made sense now. The cops weren't here for Sarah, they were watching Karen. And that shed, Mrs. Jenkins had mentioned it, hadn't she? Something about it being illegal. Sarah shook her head, amazed. Tommy ran outside, his toy car in his hand. Mom, what's happening? He asked, looking across the street. Sarah pulled him onto the swing with her. You won't believe this, she said, hugging him. Karen called the cops on our swing, but they're here for her instead. Tommy's eyes got big. Really? Why? Sarah grinned. She's got a big shed in her yard that's not allowed. It's a mess, and she got in trouble for it. Tommy laughed, loud and happy. She's in trouble? Not us. Sarah nodded. Yup. Our swing's safe. Tommy kicked his legs, making the swing rock. Good. I like it here. Sarah hugged him tighter. She felt light, like a big weight was gone. Karen had pushed and pushed, but it backfired big time. Across the street, Sarah could hear Karen's voice still complaining as the officers checked the shed. This isn't right, she yelled. I didn't do anything. But Sarah didn't care anymore. She leaned back on the swing, letting it sway. The truth was out, Karen wasn't the perfect rule keeper she pretended to be. And Sarah? She didn't have to fight. The swing won all by itself. Oh, friends, what a twist. Karen thought she'd win, but her own call to 911 flipped everything upside down. The cops weren't here for Sarah, they were here for Karen's secret shed. What happens next? Stick around, this story's got more to come. Tell me in the comments, what would you say to Karen now? Let's keep the fun going. The taller officer pulled out his little notepad. It was one of those tiny ones with a flippy top, like detectives use in movies. He looked at Karen with a serious face. Ma'am, he said, this is your third fake 911 call this month. That's a big problem. You can't just call us for no reason. You're coming with us. Karen's eyes got super wide, like two big saucers. Her mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. What? She yelled. You can't do this. I'm not the bad guy. That swing is the problem. I'll sue you. I'll sue everybody. Her voice was loud and squeaky, like a mad cartoon character. She waved her arms around, trying to look tough, but the officers didn't care one bit. They just shook their heads and grabbed her arms gently. Ma'am, let's go, the shorter officer said. He was calmer, but you could tell he was done with her nonsense. They started walking her toward the police car. Her fancy shoes clicked on the sidewalk, click, 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 like she was trying to march away. But she wasn't going anywhere she wanted. Oh no, she was headed straight for the back seat of that shiny police car. Karen kept yelling as they walked. This isn't fair. I'm a good neighbor. He's the troublemaker. That swing is ugly. It's ruining everything. Her voice bounced off the houses, loud and whiny. I could hear every word, clear as day, even from my porch. The neighbors heard it too. Curtains moved in windows, and a few people poked their heads out their doors. They were watching the show, and boy, was it a good one. I leaned back on my porch swing, nice and slow. The wood creaked under me, creak like it was saying, "Take it easy, Jake." I grinned big. The sun was warm on my face, and my lemonade glass was sweaty in my hand. I took a sip. It was sweet and cold, just perfect. Across the street, Karen was still shouting, but I didn't mind. I was happy as could be. Then something cool happened. One of my neighbors, a guy named Tom, stepped onto his porch. He was an older guy with a gray beard and a loud laugh. He clapped his hands, clap, 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 and yelled, "Thanks, Jake." His voice was big and cheerful, like he'd just won a prize. I waved back at him with a big smile. "No problem, Tom," I called. That felt good. Really good. Then another neighbor clapped. It was Mrs. Linda, who lived 2 houses down. She had a little dog that barked at everything, but today that dog was quiet. She clapped too, clap, clap, and gave me a thumbs up. "Way to go, Jake," she shouted. I waved at her too. More people started coming out. Mr. Patel from next door. The twins from the corner house. Even quiet old Mr. Henry, who never left his rocking chair, peeked out and nodded at me. It was like the whole street was cheering. I couldn't stop smiling. My swing kept creaking, creak as I rocked back and forth. Karen thought she could boss me around. She thought I was just some new guy who didn't know anything. She thought she was the queen of this neighborhood, telling everybody what to do. But she was wrong. So wrong. I'd been ready for her this whole time. And now, the HOA was mine. Yup, I was the new president. Things were about to change around here, and I couldn't wait. Let's back up a bit so you really get how awesome this moment was. See, when those officers showed up, Karen thought they were her heroes. She thought they'd march over, yank my swing down, and maybe even give me a ticket. She'd been smirking at me, all proud, like she'd won some big game. But then I told them who I was, Jake, the new HOA president, and her whole plan fell apart. Bam. Just like that. The officers didn't even blink when I said it. They knew something was up with Karen already. Turns out, she'd been calling 911 about silly stuff for weeks. One time, she called because someone parked their car an inch over her driveway line. Another time, it was because a kid's basketball rolled into her yard. And now, my porch swing. 3 fake calls in 1 month. That's why they were already parked down the street. They'd gotten a tip from somebody, maybe Tom or Mrs. Linda, and they were waiting to catch her in the act. So when they walked her to the car, it wasn't about me at all. It was about her. She'd been the troublemaker all along, not me. And the best part? I didn't even have to do much. I just sat there, swinging, letting her talk herself into trouble. It was like watching a movie where the bad guy trips over their own feet and falls flat. Karen was still yelling as they opened the car door. "This is crazy. I'm important. You'll hear from my lawyer," she screeched. But the officers stayed calm. The taller one said, "Ma'am, you can tell it to the judge." Then they helped her into the back seat. She didn't want to sit, but they made her. The door shut with a loud thunk. That sound felt like music to my ears. I rocked on my swing some more, creak. The police car started up, its engine rumbling low. Red and blue lights flashed for a second, just to let everybody know they meant business. Then they pulled away, slow and steady. Karen's face was pressed against the window, all red and mad. She glared at me as they drove off, but I just waved. "Bye, Karen," I said, loud enough for her to hear. I don't know if she did, but it sure felt good to say it. The street got quiet again after that. The birds started chirping, tweet like nothing had happened. The breeze blew through the trees, rustling the leaves. My lemonade was almost gone, so I took one last sip. The ice clinked in the glass, clink. I set it down on the porch railing and stretched my arms out. This was nice. Tom walked over a minute later. He had a big grin on his face. "Jake, you're a legend," he said. "That lady's been a pain forever. Always yelling about something. You fixed it in one day. I laughed. Thanks, Tom. I didn't really do much. She did it to herself. He nodded. True, true. But you stood up to her. That swing's awesome, by the way. Where'd you get it? I told him about the little store downtown where I'd found it. It was wooden, painted blue, with soft cushions. I'd loved it the second I saw it. Tom said he might get one too. Maybe we'll start a swing club, he joked. We both laughed at that. Mrs. Linda came over next with her little dog, Sparky. Sparky sniffed my shoes and wagged his tail. Jake, I've lived here 10 years, she said. Karen's been bossing us around the whole time. She told me my flowers were too pink once. Can you believe that? I shook my head. That's wild, Mrs. Linda. Too pink? Really? She giggled. Yup. Thanks for shutting her down. You're a hero. I blushed a little. Ah, I'm no hero. I just wanted to sit on my swing. But she patted my arm. You're a hero to us. Keep that swing up, okay? I promised I would. Sparky barked woof, woof like he agreed. Cute little guy. More neighbors stopped by after that. Mr. Patel brought me a cookie from his kitchen. It was warm and gooey, with chocolate chips. For the new president, he said with a wink. The twins, Mia and Max, ran over and asked if they could try my swing. I said sure, and they took turns pushing each other creak, creak, creak. Even old Mr. Henry shuffled over with his cane. He didn't say much, just mumbled, "Good job, kid," and gave me a nod. That meant a lot, coming from him. The sun started to set while we all hung out. The sky turned orange and pink, pretty as a picture. I looked around at everybody, Tom, Mrs. Linda, Mr. Patel, the twins, Mr. Henry, and felt warm inside. Not just from the sun, but from them. This was my neighborhood now. My home. And Karen? She wasn't going to ruin it anymore. See, being HOA president meant I could make some rules of my own. Nothing crazy, just stuff to keep things fair. No more silly notes about grass or mailboxes. No more fake 911 calls over nothing. People could have swings or pink flowers or whatever they wanted, as long as they weren't hurting anybody. That's how it should be, right? I thought about Karen for a second. She was probably at the police station by now, still mad, still yelling. Maybe she'd learn something from this. Maybe she'd chill out. Probably not, though. People like her don't change easy. But that was her problem, not mine. Not ours. The twins hopped off the swing, and I sat back down. Creak, creak, creak. The sound was like a little song now. Tom grabbed a chair from his porch and sat nearby. Mrs. Linda stayed too, petting Sparky. We talked about all kinds of stuff: baseball, cookies, the best pizza in town. The stars came out, twinkling up high. It was a perfect night. I'd been ready for Karen all along, even if she didn't know it. When I moved here, I heard the stories. Tom warned me about her on my first day. Watch out for that one, he'd said. So I watched. I listened. I took notes in my head every time she got bossy. And when I got picked as HOA president last week, I knew I'd have to deal with her sooner or later. Today was sooner, and it worked out just fine. The police car was long gone now. Karen was long gone too, at least for tonight. Maybe she'd be back someday, grumbling and glaring. But I wasn't scared. Neither were my neighbors. We had each other, and that was stronger than any of her tantrums. I rocked on my swing some more. Creak, creak, creak. The air was cool now, and the lemonade glass was empty. I didn't need more, though. I had everything I wanted right here. Good neighbors. A quiet street. A swing that wasn't going anywhere. Things were about to change around here, and I was ready to make them better. No more Karens running the show. Just people being nice, having fun, living their lives. That's what a neighborhood should be. And that's what ours was gonna be from now on. So there you have it, folks. Karen called the cops on my porch swing, thinking she'd win the day. But guess what? She ended up in the backseat of that police car instead. Funny how life works, isn't it? 1 minute, she's yelling and pointing, acting like she's the boss of everything. The next minute, She's riding away, mad as a wet cat. It's almost like a joke, but it's real life. I sat there on my swing creak, creak, creak watching it all happen. The sun was setting, turning the sky all pink and orange. My lemonade glass was empty, but I didn't mind. I was too busy thinking about how wild this day turned out. Karen thought she could scare me, push me around, make me take my swing down. But she didn't know I was ready for her. She didn't know I was the new HOA president. And she really didn't know the cops were already onto her tricks. Sometimes, the loudest people are the ones hiding the most stuff. Karen was like that. She shouted about rules and swings and how everything had to be her way. She acted big and tough, stomping around with her phone and her papers. But deep down, I think she was scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of people not listening to her. That's why she yelled so much, because if she stopped, maybe no one would care what she said. And in the end, that's what happened. No one cared. They clapped for me instead. And sometimes, the quiet guy, the one just sipping his lemonade and swinging, turns out to be the one in charge. That's me, Jake. I didn't need to yell or fight. I didn't need to make a big fuss. I just watched and waited. I let Karen dig her own hole, and boy, did she dig it deep. 3 fake 911 calls. That's a lot of trouble she brought on herself. All I had to do was sit back and tell the truth when the time came. Easy peasy. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a yes or no in the comments below. Tell me if you've ever met someone like her, too. Oh, and if you liked this story, give it a big thumbs up and tell a friend about it. I've got more fun tales coming your way, so stick around. Stay curious, and keep swinging, okay? Let's talk about this a little more, because it's pretty cool when you think about it. Life can surprise you sometimes. One day, you're just a regular kid or a regular guy like me, minding your own business. You're not looking for trouble. You just want to enjoy your swing and your lemonade. But then someone like Karen comes along. She's loud. She's bossy. She thinks she can tell you what to do. And maybe for a second, you wonder if she's right. Maybe you think, should I just give up? But here's the thing, you don't have to. You don't have to let the loud people win. You can stay calm. You can be smart. You can wait for the right moment to show who you really are. That's what I did. I didn't scream back at Karen. I didn't rip up her silly HOA rules or throw my lemonade at her, though that might have been funny. I just smiled and let her talk. And when the cops showed up, I told them the truth. That's all it took. It's like when you're at school, right? Maybe there's a kid who's always loud, always telling everyone what to do. They act like they're the king or queen of the playground. They might even pick on you or your friends. But sometimes, those loud kids aren't as strong as they seem. Maybe they're just scared of being ignored. Maybe they're afraid no one likes them. And if you stay cool and don't let them get to you, they don't know what to do. They huff and puff, but they can't blow your house down. That's what happened with Karen. She huffed and puffed all the way to my porch. She called the cops, thinking they'd be her big bad wolves. But I had my own trick up my sleeve. I wasn't just some new guy. I was the HOA president. And the cops? They weren't her wolves, they were there for her. It's like a fairy tale, but with a swing instead of a castle. I rocked on my swing some more, creak, creak, creak. The stars were coming out now, little twinkly dots in the dark sky. My neighbors were still hanging around. Tom was telling a joke about his dog. Mrs. Linda was petting Sparky and laughing. The twins, Mia and Max, were running around, chasing fireflies. It was peaceful. It was happy. And it made me think about something big. See, this whole thing with Karen wasn't just about a swing. It was about standing up for yourself, but in a quiet way. It was about not letting someone else ruin your day or your whole neighborhood. Karen tried to make everything her way. She wanted perfect lawns, perfect mailboxes, no swings. But why? Who cares if my swing's blue or if Mrs. Linda's flowers are pink? It's our street. We should get to enjoy it. And that's what I'm gonna do as HOA president. I'm not gonna be like Karen, bossing people around. I'm gonna make things fair. If you want a swing, put up a swing. If you want pink flowers, plant 'em. If your grass gets a little long because you're busy playing baseball or reading a good book, that's okay. We're neighbors, not robots. We should help each other, not fight over silly stuff. I bet you've got people like that in your life too. Maybe not a Karen with a phone and HOA rules, but someone who tries to boss you around. Maybe it's a kid at school who says you can't sit with them. Maybe it's a big brother or sister who takes your toys. Or maybe it's even a grown-up who says you can't do something fun, like ride your bike too fast or eat ice cream before dinner. What do you do about them? Well, here's what I learned from this: you don't always have to shout back. You don't have to cry or give up either. You can be like me on my swing, just chill and wait. Watch what they do. Listen to what they say. And when the time's right, you can show them you're stronger than they think. Maybe not with muscles or loud words, but with smarts and a little patience. That's real power. Think about it. Karen was loud as a fire truck, but she didn't win. I was quiet as a mouse, and I came out on top. The neighbors didn't cheer for her, they cheered for me. They didn't wave at her, they waved at me. And now, they're not scared of her anymore. They're happy. They're free to be themselves. All because I didn't let her push me around. What if you tried that too? Next time someone's mean or bossy, don't get mad right away. Take a deep breath. Maybe even imagine you're on a swing, going back and forth, creak, creak, creak. Let them talk. Let them huff and puff. Then, when you're ready, do something smart. Tell a teacher. Help a friend. Show them you're not scared. You might be surprised how strong you really are. I looked up at the stars again. They were so bright, like little lights cheering me on. The breeze was cool now, brushing my face. My swing kept going, creak, creak, creak. I thought about Karen one more time. She was probably at the police station, still mad, still yelling. But that didn't matter anymore. She couldn't ruin this night. She couldn't ruin this neighborhood. We were done with her nonsense. So what do you think, friends? Did Karen get what she deserved? I say yes. She tried to mess with me, but she messed with herself instead. Funny, right? Tell me what you think in the comments. Did you like seeing her ride away in that police car? Would you have waved at her like I did? And hey, have you ever had a swing or something cool that someone tried to take away? I want to hear your stories. If you like this one, give it a big thumbs up. Share it with your best buddy, your cousin, your dog, okay, maybe not your dog, but you get it. I've got more fun stuff coming, so don't go anywhere. Stay curious, okay? Ask questions. Look around. And keep swinging, no matter what anybody says. You're tougher than you know, just like me on my porch that day. Let's make a deal. Next time you're outside, look up at the sky. If you see a star wink at you, think of this story. Think of Jake and his swing. Think of Karen and her big mistake. And remember, the quiet ones, the ones who don't give up, they're the ones who shine the brightest. Just like those stars. Just like you. See you next time, pals. Keep being awesome. And don't let any Karen stop you from having fun. Swing high, dream big, and I'll catch you soon.